Hey guys, welcome back to the show. We have another Simpsons psychoanalysis for you this week. This one is on the episode Bart's Dog Gets Enough, which is a play off the other title that came first, the last episode of the first season, Bart Gets Enough. So this is what disobedience and his little helper. What is the Simpson family going to do? And of course, I think what this really is going to showcase is how to integrate unconscious emotions, which is the only way you will ever grow. The only way you will ever grow, hear me now, believe me later, is if you integrate unconscious emotions. Either you can do it on purpose with me, you can do it on accident, or you're not going to grow. That's just it. And what this episode does is it explicates the process of how this happens exactly. So here we have in the, this is not the first. This is the first, okay. So this is the first clip I want to show you. This is Homer chastising Santa's little helper for not giving him the paper. Bad dog. Homer says bad dog, indicating a less than healthy relationship with unconscious issues here represented by Santa's little helper. And throughout this presentation of this episode, it kind of goes back and forth. Sometimes each individual member in the Simpsons family represents an individual, but sometimes, I would say generally the entire Simpsons family represents an individual, and each member is a psychological part within that individual family. What the family represents, which is the individual. So we have Santa's little helper here. He is the lower, the catonic, the base, the yin, and he's not integrated very well within the family, which is why he's disobedient. And there's other ill effects in the Simpsons family because of this. Lisa is sick. She has the mumps. Lisa, of course, represents reason. And she's sick. She's still smart, I guess, but she simply can't perform. She can't go to school because of this poor relationship. To go back to this first slide, Homer doesn't try to communicate with Santa's little helper in any helpful way, just thinks that the dog is bad, like there's something wrong with the dog. And isn't it funny that Homer, the most catonic member of the family, aside from the pets, is the one who has the most disagreeable relationship with that which represents the lowest part of the family, Santa's little helper. We avow, we chastise publicly that which we inwardly know is us. Good representation of that. So yeah, Lisa's sick. She has the mumps because of this dysregulated emotion, because of this part of the family that hasn't been fully integrated. And here we have Homer trying to just tell Santa's little helper, I don't want you to have my food. But Santa's little helper is hungry, as we'll see. Homer is not paying attention to what the catonic need really is. He's just saying, I don't want you to have my food. Yeah, but this dog has needs. And unless you understand, and unless you can perceive what those needs are, the dog is not really going to tell you. Well, not explicitly, at least. He's going to tell you by trying to get your breakfast, which you think is poor behavior. So we need to recognize this dog as a part of the family and ask, well, what are these needs? So he calls up to Marge. Marge, the dog is hungry. And she says back in a sing-song way, as it says there, well, then feed him. And Homer says, yes, master. In these earlier episodes, this is season 2. In these earlier episodes, Homer, I guess he becomes a big idiot later on. It's in the later episodes when, Homer's character becomes a parody of itself. He becomes, quote, jerk-ass Homer, unquote. But if you were over at this family's house and Homer was yelling up to Marge, who's taking care of sick Lisa. There's probably great symbolism there, right? Because Lisa's sick. Marge, the caregiver of the hire, is distracted, so she can't feed Santa's little helper. So now Homer has to do it. but he's just totally tuned out from his Santa's Little Helper's needs. So tuned out that he would just complain to Marge about it rather than just feeding him himself. Which, if you have a dog, feeding him is a lot of fun. Why would you want to give that to anybody else? I love doing that. And then, of course, Santa's Little Helper eats his breakfast, and they just chain him out in the yard. And isn't that what you do with dysregulated emotions when you don't know how to manage them? You just chain them out back. Yeah, I mean, it's still here, but we're not happy about it. And then the dysregulation is carried out. Santa's Little Helper digging up the backyard, creating a... Right, I mean, just look at how much of the backyard he's torn up within the radius of his leash. There's energy there. There are needs going unmet. And so because of that, he acts out in a disobedient way. The Simpson family acts out in disobedient ways. And it even, feels the ill effects of it by Lisa getting sick. Here it's indicated that Santa's Little Helper doesn't understand English. He doesn't understand when humans try to talk to him. And it's not simply understanding... Well, it is understanding the emotion and the intention behind the communication that comes from humans, but also it's clear by this, he doesn't even understand the Krusty doll here who says, "You're my best friend." It's a talking doll. It says, "You're my best friend." It just sounds like jabbering to Santa's Little Helper. It's black and white. This is Santa's Little Helper view. What does this mean? I think it means that... Man, I had a good thought there. I think it means that Santa's Little Helper is just completely disconnected from the higher. He can't even listen to a dog. Or listen to a doll, excuse me. And then in the next scene, Lisa is sick. She's going to get out of school, and Bart, as a symptom of this dysregulation, is lazy. I mean, Bart's lazy. It's like, Lisa wants Bart to get homework for her from school. And Bart's like, well, what are you doing? You have this time off. Just sit around and do nothing. Lisa still wants to work, even though she, quote, really probably not a good idea for her to work. It's better for her to just sit and relax. But Bart, again, as a symptom of a dysregulation in the family, it's like, yeah, I guess he wants Lisa to do the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. You wasted the chicken pox. Don't waste the mums, right? And then I think this is a great... So now we're back to Santa's Little Helper out in the backyard, and he does something funny here, which I bring up several times. Like, what is shame? What is dysregulated emotion? And shame is this feeling. It's this affect that we get around dysregulated emotions. It's just something that appears. I don't think it's an emotion as I would typically define it. It is an affect. It is an affect that appears around dysregulated emotions. Around anxiety, we don't know how to manage in a healthy way. Around anger, we don't know how to manage in a healthy way. What was my shame symbolism that I used? I mean, this goes back years. I mean, probably a decade now. Is what shame does is it doesn't just destroy things. It's like you're gardening, right? And it creates this plant, it creates this flower, and here we have Santa's Little Helper with a flower, and it nurtures it. And he gets the flower to grow to this beautiful thing, and then right as the flower is about to win some prize in the county flower competition, I think they have orchid competitions, it stomps on it. It ruins it. Self-sabotage, shame. This is how it interacts. This is how it affects us when we're not aware of it. And this is what Santa's Little Helper does here. Is he takes this potted flower. Well, first he digs this hole. He takes this flower and puts it in this hole. You're like, oh, this dog, it's at least accidentally doing the right thing by putting the flower into the hole in the ground. And then he just tears up the flower. It's like so close, and then you ruin it. And of course, he breaks free. I can't see it there, but this is a never break collar. again, just indications of, I don't want to deal with this unconscious emotion. I'm going to put it in the backyard and I'm going to keep it there with my commands from on high, with my leash that here I think represents affirmations. And I'm going to be disciplined and I'm going to wake up at this time and do this thing. But it's just never, no matter the promise of these affirmations, it never works long term. It works for a little bit until your unconscious emotions really want to get away, as Santa's Little Helper does here. It gets away and then wreaks havoc throughout the town, eating beef jerky at the Quickie Mart. Getting his needs met, not in a pro-social way, but he goes out and gets his needs met. And then what does he do next here? But it's not all bad. I mean, one thing that I think it's good to note here is that Santa's Little Helper also chases birds, and that's what I've always likened men talking to women as. It's like a dog out chasing birds. And the dog never catches a bird, but just the act of doing it, or a squirrel or whatever, just the act of chasing animals, it's satisfying, right? I mean, that's what Santa's Little Helper is out without a leash on him, is he is, maybe doing unhealthy things by wreaking havoc in Apu's convenience store, but he's also satiating his needs in a way that only the Catonic knows how to. So Homer gets a call. We're going to skip a few minutes here. Santa's Little Helper swimming in some pool, and then he takes him home. And isn't it interesting that the first person to be nice to Santa's Little Helper in this episode, and really the first time we see Santa's Little Helper smile in this episode, which will give us an instance of what the solution is and how to integrate unconscious emotions, the first person to treat Santa's Little Helper well and to acknowledge him for the monster that he is Flanders. Who's, of course, the nice, uptight religious guy. But isn't this what religion is? Religion is creation of form for the Catonic, for these lower parts, for this unconscious that, when we first come up against it, we go, oh, this is terrible. And usually we only come up against it when we're, in a terrible state in our lives. Like, Jung always says, if you're having dreams with archetypal symbols in them, like if you have mandala dreams, you're not, life isn't going well, at least in that moment, right? You are a frayed nerve. You are an exposed raw nerve in your life at that moment if you're so deep in your unconscious in your dreams that you come up against these archetypal symbols. But this is what religion does, is it takes these archetypal symbols, it takes these hallucinations of, quote, crazy guys that we all relate with, and it puts them up in this church and says, look at them, let's all relate. So I think it's interesting that, maybe Ned Flanders is the uptight religious guy, but he knows, because he is religious, he knows. It's like what Muslims say about putting women in burqas. It's not that they're in denial of their sexuality. No, they know. They know that women are sexual. And there's no getting around that. And that's why they put him in burqas. Now, obviously, I don't think that's the right thing to do. It's clearly the Muslim version of putting Santa's Little Helper in a never break collar, right? It's just creating these principles from on high and repressing sexuality. But I just think it's interesting here that Ned is the one who can recognize Santa's Little Helper for the water monster that he is. Water monster, right? I mean, just the connotations of water. If you're into Jung. And then Homer gets distracted, right? Rather than, it's time to discipline. It's time to communicate with Santa's Little Helper. What does Homer do? Is he gets distracted by not success. Of course, then it wouldn't be a distraction, but the trappings of success, these expensive shoes that Flanders bought, these assassins. And that'll come back later. And then Lisa goes to the doctor. She does indeed have the mumps, as Dr. Hibbert confirms. And this is interesting because Dr. Hibbert asks her what her favorite subject in school is, and Lisa says arithmetic. very much a Spock, a Mr. Spock kind of, science, STEM, very much in line with the logos, the yang that Lisa represents here. She didn't say history. Why did she say arithmetic? And why doesn't she say math? Why did she say arithmetic? I don't know. Because I think math is just more of an abstract field. And, I took a lot of math in college, and, I just found it. The more advanced you get in math, the more abstract it becomes. But arithmetic is just very factual, very black and white. So I think that's why it's arithmetic and not math. This is what the consciousness does when it's trying to compensate for dysregulated emotions, is it focuses on facts, the concrete. Look at Sam Harris. I mean, Lisa, by saying arithmetic is her favorite subject, she's saying that, she's basically like Sam Harris. And this guy who claims to like reason, but he just doesn't have the emotional wherewithal to really know what is entailed when he speaks of reason. And then what does Dr. Hibbert do? Is he indulges. Is he indulges when you're sick, you must necessarily end up indulging yourself. When you have dysregulated emotions, you must indulge yourself. This is one of the example of it being a skewed line between Lisa being an individual and the Simpson family, each component of which is an individual. But Lisa's still the yang, she's still the high, she's still the consciousness. And what does the consciousness do when it regresses? What's a healthy way to regress is to revert back to archetypes. I mean, this is what you do, and this is what she's doing here. She is being introduced to the Simpson family quilt, noting different family members from the family, past achievements, whatever important thing has happened to the Simpson family. And so she regresses and goes in the past, goes back in her history. This is a healthy way of, okay, you're sick, there's dysregulated emotion. How do you manage that? Well, first you go back to the past and figure out, how did we end up here in the first place? Let's look at our family history to figure out, exactly that, how we got here. And this is what Lisa does. Very impressed, and she becomes very into it, as we will see. But first, Homer. Man, now I forget why Homer is in the mall. He's in the mall for something. Anyways, he gets distracted. I thought that was important. Why is Homer in the mall? Anyways, he gets distracted by the assassins, and I think this is, join the conspiracy, right? What's the conspiracy? Conspiracy theories are really popular now, and I admit I have my own conspiracy theories to some degree, and it's not too much. But ultimately, the conspiracy that affects you the most, that I know affects me the most, way more than any, cabal, Bilderberg group, whatever, taking over America, is your own conspiracy with yourself. And isn't that what fear is? Fear is a conspiracy you have with yourself to hide who you are from other people. And this is what Homer, allows himself to be distracted by. And here he has the rationalization as a sign of fear. He imagines that what Ned said was, I demand that you get these shoes. This is Homer's rationalization. This is Homer. His conspiracy with himself to hide what's really important, which is, Homer, you have this dog who's, you do not communicate well with this dog, as represented by your family being fractured, and now you're distracting yourself with this by rationalization. That's the conspiracy. So Homer gets the assassins, and he puts them up, and I made a GIF. And he hides them, right? We can see that Homer, doesn't hide them, but he puts them up high so Santa's little helper couldn't reach them. But the lace falls, and you could say, and because the lace falls, that's why Santa's little helper is able to reach the shoes. Isn't this what we do? Isn't this a self-sabotage that you do? Oh, look, I'm grandstanding. I'm saying, no, I'm putting the shoes up so Santa's little helper doesn't get them. But you secretly want Santa's little helper to get the shoes. Why weren't you being more careful with the lace, right? It's because you unconsciously want it. Because, we can say self-sabotage is a bad thing, but ultimately we need it to show us what's going on. So it's you trying to reveal to yourself the truth of who you are. That's why you work really hard on this orchid, in this competition. And so it means more. So it's more dramatic at the day before the competition when you get drunk and you rip it in half. Oh, it's self-sabotage. Because you did that, your life is now going in a negative direction. It's not necessarily negative. It's just showing you what's going on. And this is what the higher parts of us do when they're not in touch with the lower parts. They know. And Homer is not, doesn't represent the highest component in the Simpson family, but he's definitely higher than Santa's little helper. And what's the solution to this is a bigger collar, a bigger leash with a bigger lock, more affirmations, more discipline, chastisement, right? Self-criticism, chastisement. But, Marge, who represents the higher form of consciousness, she wants to put Santa's little helper in some kind of obedience school. And here we see that the culture at large doesn't really understand what disobedience is. This one indicates that disobedience is bad. Like it represents something lower. East Side rough form school. Rough form, reform. Indicated that the dogs are rough. There's something wrong with them and they need... Right, like you're disobedient, you're bad. There's something wrong with you. There's something immoral with you. And maybe there's something is immoral, but this is a psychology channel, not a philosophy channel. All right, so this just represents the negative view that maybe culture at large has with catonic eruptions of our unconscious. And another one, right, if you're disobedient, then you're crazy. This one. And the tagline here is, I don't know if it's a tagline, but it's a claim here is like, we once taught a dog to drive. Right, and that's silly because a dog's not supposed to drive. If you taught a dog to drive, you're making it do something unnatural, indicating that, yeah, maybe you can make a dog less crazy, but you do it in an unnatural way. And you know that if you teach a dog how to drive, or you say you have to drive to be a good dog, then there is going to be a compensation for that and more disobedience in the future. In the short term, yeah, you maybe can teach a dog to drive. I don't know how you would do that without giving it opposable thumbs, but whatever, it's a joke, right? But this is something that I've said before is, people, I think the reason why we have a disconnect with our unconscious in our society is because just people cannot recognize its nature. Or they think that its nature should be, quote, one way, when in fact is not that one way. So, so a common example is with sexuality. Or what Muslims do, for example, with sexuality. But, we do it here in the West, just to a less degree, is it's wrong. It's bad. It's an evil, but it's a necessary evil because without it, we don't have procreation. So you can only have, this is more a strict version of it. You can only have sex within the confines of marriage and only for the sake of procreation. There's still a lot of that in America, even though most of us don't believe that, but we were founded by Puritans. So a lot of that is still in our culture. And, right, like we shouldn't have sexuality. We shouldn't need sexuality to connect with somebody in a romantic way. Yeah, but it's our nature to do that. And of course, there can be misuses of sexuality, especially when it comes from poor intentions or a place of low, if you don't have a very solid concept of yourself, it can really come out in negative ways and you can hurt people with your sexuality. Of course you can. But it's there and it exists. And in order to really manage it, we need to acknowledge that. And that example I always use, it's, saying that we should just not be sexual is like saying a dog isn't moral unless it reads Einstein or reads Shakespeare, and then it goes out in the yard and buries a bone in the backyard, and we say, I told you, I always knew that dogs were bad. Like, No, what did you want it to do? You did not start with where you are. You did not begin with the facts of reality. You begin with what you think dogs should do, ultimately because you're insecure about your inability to communicate with dogs. And I think that kind of idea is represented here in this ad. And then Marvin Monroe's Canine Therapy Institute, your dog isn't the problem, you are. Which is true. I think this is true, but what's Marvin Monroe's solution is to hit the guy with the, more corporal punishment. Instead of tying the dog in the backyard, we need to tie you in the backyard. This is the best of these ads, but it's just a lateral move, right? And then we finally come to Emily Winthrop's Canine College, when nobody knows what they're talking about, when nobody knows how to discipline dogs, when nobody knows how to communicate with dogs or that which represents the lower, the unconscious. What do we have to rely on? Marketing. That's all we have. Marketing and reputation. Oh, look at that ionic column and that, oh, it looks, Emily Winthrop, it sounds very regal and aristocratic, like comes from a school of good breeding, like dogs come from good breeding, all these connotations. But I think we're going to find out that Emily Winthrop doesn't know any better than anybody else does. She just has better marketing. And I think that's very indicated today when you have therapists who go out, and they're not good therapists, but they have a bunch of credentials behind their name. It doesn't make you a good therapist. In fact, to the extent that there's a problem with the APA and psychology academia as a whole, and there's huge problems, the more credentials you get, the more degrees you get, chances are you're going to actually be a worse therapist. And so that's what we find out here, right? It's just corporal punishment. It's just strict punishment. That's all she advises Bart to do. And here we have Santa's little helper being choked out by a cow. I just think that, obviously abuse of dogs is awful, but this is funny because it does show an abuse of dogs, but there's just something funny about it. I like how his eyes kind of go in two different directions. It's funny, right? and then you have Marge and Lisa, at least in this episode, representing the higher forms of consciousness, but they're sitting home and they are actually distracted by the lower. They are intrigued, and here they're watching some sultry soap opera. You have a guy who is abusive to this woman, yet she still loves him. And I love that look in his eyes, that half open eyes as he's making out with her. It's just like, doesn't really care. He's not really into it. Her eyes are closed, she's into it. And this is intriguing, of course, to all forms of our consciousness. I just think it's a funny thing that they get into it. Obedience school. It's not working out for Bart. This is the montage where all the dogs are learning. But presumably they only learn because they're choking their dogs out with a chain. And Bart's not going to do that, right? He doesn't want to hurt Santa's little helper. He's trying to do it in the right way. But he's still not communicating with him, as we see by Santa's little helper's look there. Trying to push his butt down. No, you're not you're on the wrong end, Bart. It's very noble that you don't want to choke your dog out, but you're on the wrong end. And it's not a function of, there just needs to be more weight on Santa's little helper's butt to get him to sit. It's you aren't really communicating with him. I guess this is very much like if we have something to work on and we know we're not supposed to go check Twitter, right? When we're like fighting, we're like, I really shouldn't be checking Twitter, and we just find ourselves fighting with this impulse to check Twitter. You're going to lose that fight eventually. You will win in the moment, perhaps, and you'll get whatever you need to get done, but on the long enough time frame, you will lose that fight. If you are not communicating with your unconscious in a healthy way, you will lose. Doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what you want. And then Homer goes to return the shoes after Santa Little's helper destroys them, and I thought this was just a good There's a section of the shoe store that's for street crime, and I think this is just interesting how, it just speaks to, I don't want to be, weird leftist anti-corporate guy, but corporations will feed off lower impulses in us to make money. Whose fault is that? Is it the corporation's fault, or is it our fault for not managing these impulses, our own Santa's Little Helper, in a healthy way? So we're much more likely, therefore, to commit street crime. And when that happens, corporations are going to do whatever they can to profit off of it. It doesn't cause the problem, I would say, but it exposes our problem. It aggravates a problem that's already there. And then the clerk at the shoe store, he says, our warranty doesn't cover fire, theft, or acts of dog. Dog is God backwards. Here it's implied that the dog is God. I don't think dogs are gods, but our connection with them maybe is a closer indication of perhaps what God means to us. Not what God is philosophically, but at least what God means to us. No matter whether you believe in God, it indicates what God means to us. The Simpsons' ability to connect with Santa's Little Helper will be, at least in this episode, what God is. And that's indicated here by what the clerk says. Homer's at the mall, gets distracted by this cookie place. He gets a free sample. And then he laments this lady. Oh, that's what you do. You get me addicted and then jack up the price. So he goes in and buys a cookie. And yeah. When higher parts of yourself are distracted, when they lack regulation by forming a relationship with the unconscious, they get distracted, they get addicted. These things are way more likely to happen. So Homer gets the cookie and puts a note on it saying, this is my property, nobody take it. But he's just calling attention to it, right? He's putting it in the cookie jar, he's putting it out on the table for anybody to see. He's making a point on the surface. He's making a point like, I don't want anybody to destroy this cookie, but secretly he wants to, because unless the unconscious destroys this cookie, he's not going to be able to grow. And Lisa sews her own patch into the quilt. It's like it represents the two sides of music. Oh God, I forget the music teacher's name. I feel shame about this. What is his name? Mr. Margot? Crap. You guys are probably screaming at it screaming at the screen right now. But anyway, so one of her music influences sucks the soul out of music, and the other one infuses soul into the music. Music, it's just this thing out there. It doesn't really mean much. It's all in how we approach it. In a sense, she's summing up, in a way, the theme of the episode. So I think that's good. But they leave it there, and Santa's Little Helper tears it apart. Marge is upset, but that's what the dysregulated emotion does when we leave it alone. Is it tears things up? It ruins our history. It turns our history upside down. It says that your nature, in a sense, doesn't matter. That there is no history. It erases that. That's what it does. And then they're having a discussion about what to do with Santa's Little Helper. Of course, Homer wants to get rid of him, but Lisa, even though, she's been affected by this, she just added her patch to the quilt. She's saying, is that what we do? We can't just get rid of this part of ourselves. We need to learn how to work with him. And Homer, though he's, very passionate about getting rid of Santa's Little Helper, Lisa, even though she's more affected, Homer's cookie was eaten, but that's kind of the joke, because it's not that much of a big deal as it is for the quilt. To Homer it is. But Lisa's actually more dispassionate. She's more reasonable, which again just indicates this disconnection in the family between reason and emotion. And then next, what's coming up here? Oh yeah, so they decide if Santa's little helper doesn't pass obedience school, then they're going to get rid of him. So no, a lot's on the line. Bart realizes that that's not going to happen, that Santa's little helper isn't going to learn, and he says, look, can you just pass my dog? Since you're going to get paid either way, just pass him. And Emily Winthrop, what she says here is heavens to Murgatroyd, which is like an old English aristocratic name, as indication that she does come from her view of life is that of a stratified society. Of what society should be is that of one that's stratified. And she's not, and she has principles here because she's not going to pass Santa's little helper. But because she comes from the stratified society where you do recognize certain names as being better than others, Murgatroyd being one of these names, that it's still important to her that principles matter. Now, maybe not principles in the fact of like you're loyal to the aristocratic family that you come from, the fields of whom you tend, but she's gonna be, driven by principles, and so she's not gonna pass Santa's little helper. And what Bart does is he chokes out Santa's little helper here. He does it. He abuses his emotions to fit in. He abuses his emotions to earn the approval of somebody else. And isn't that what we all do? When we just don't know how to communicate with what's going on with us, we end up abusing our emotions ourselves for the sake of other people's approval, or at least the avoidance of their disapproval. And that's what Bart does here. But then he quickly acknowledges that was a mistake, and he hugs Santa's little helper, and I don't know. Is Santa's little helper is this the beginning of the communication that Bart has with Santa's little helper? Is this the beginning of the end? Lisa, she creates a new patch that connotes the destruction of the old quilt. Oh yeah, that's the point I wanted to make. So Bart here promises that he's not going to hurt Santa's little helper again. And Lisa's been sick in every scene of this show. Lisa's sickness, of course, being a representation of this dysregulated emotion within the family. The first time that she is shown to be healthy in this episode is in the next scene. That's why I wanted to bring this up. She doesn't have the mumps anymore. So what really cured Lisa? Maybe it was just promising that, no matter what happens with my emotions, I'm not going to abuse them anymore. Because maybe bad will come in the short term when this happens. But long term, this is going to be the better thing. I mean, that's the fundamental shift here when Bart makes that promise to Santa's little helper. Like, I'm not going to just do affirmations to get rid of you. I may still do affirmations, but I'm not going to do it to shut you out. I'm not going to make my gratitude list when I feel depressed. I'm actually going to look at why I'm depressed. Understand what that depression says, how that relates with anger, how that relates with my needs, between a healthy need and an unhealthy need. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make this clear, because this abuse of you is not working, and that's when the family heals, as represented by Lisa being healthy, not having the mumps. And isn't it a great thing when you finally confront your emotions, right? And you look at them for what they really are, and you're not going to abuse them anymore. Now you look at all the bad things, quote unquote, that your emotions have done in the past, and you're like, this is beautiful. Actually, at the lowest point, what I thought was my lowest point, when I took this perspective on my emotions, it ended up being my highest. And Lisa, who's well, now is able to move about the family and, communicate well. Of course, she represents the Logos again. And she says, Bart, he's not going to learn it now, so don't spend your last hours tormenting the poor creature. Bart's out in the yard trying to get Santa's little helper to sit and look at Santa's little helper. He's in play pose here. He just wants to play. What's going on? She says, have some fun, frolic with him. And she, go get it, boy. She throws the ball, and then Bart and Santa's little helper, they're playing. They're wrestling. In this scene, actually, Santa's little helper is on top now, and Bart's on bottom, but previously, a few seconds previously, maybe I should have done a GIF for this. Bart was on top, and, indicating this play between high and the low. It's not a static state, a regulation, individuation is not a static state. It's this constant process of the high becoming low, the low coming high and back and forth. And then Bart gets, really sad because he's having fun with him, but he realizes, man, Santa's Little Helper isn't going to get better. If only you just could listen to me. And this is the last scene we see of Bart before Santa's Little Helper begins to obey him. He's about to cry. Maybe he is crying, but he's not. He's at least not depicting any tears here. And then next what happens is we kind of zoom in on Santa's Little Helper's face there, right? Indicating that, we're going into his mind, and here in Santa's Little Helper's mind, he sees Bart cry. And when Bart cries, that's when he listens. When Bart totally gives up, that's when he listens. When Bart wants nothing else in the world than to communicate with his dog, that's when the dog listens. Dog doesn't listen to everything. He still hears everything else as blah, 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 but he does understand sit. You can't communicate with your dysregulated... I love the symbolism. You're never really communicating with your dysregulated emotions. There's always going to be something there, but you can do it more. You can do it more. So I don't know what Bart's saying here. Nobody knows, but he does say sit, and that's what Santa's Little Helper listens to. And then at the end of the episode, when we do the outro, very much like at the end of Animal House, to see what happened to all the dogs, Santa's Little Helper bit Bart, and Homer didn't mind. Again, this indication that, you can train your dog, you can train the unconscious, it's still going to come up and bite you, but you're not going to mind. It's okay. You're not going to freak out at every instance of a dysregulated emotions eruption. It happens. The only alternative is to live without these dysregulated emotions. And I mean, what would the Simpsons be without Santa's Little Helper? So that's it for this breakdown, this Simpsons psychoanalysis. Hope this, I think these episodes have a lot of meaning hidden in them. I think that's why they're funny. Why they're funny is why they're meaningful. This is where humor comes from. Made that point before. Maybe you glean something from this, even if you're not the biggest fan of The Simpsons. But if you're not, at least, the first 9 seasons, the 90s Simpsons, as we say, there is no greater sign of dysregulation than not being a fan of at least the 90s Simpsons. All right. Thank you guys. We do free consultations, animusempire.com/schedule. If you just want to reach out and talk, no big deal. We can do that. Thank you guys, and I will leave it there.